We have associates come in, new grads all the time. Well, you're going to give me a $30K sign-on bonus, right? And I want $1,500 a day minimum. Meanwhile, their production, they only ever done 1 crown a day. And I'm sitting here saying, also, if you get $1,500 a day, what are you going to promise me you can produce? And inevitably, they don't know because they've never been in the real world. So that's probably part of the reason that a lot of these, groups might be struggling is we're promising these new grads who don't have the skills to be able to educate patients, to be able to get treatment acceptance, and to be able to actually do the treatment and not refer almost everything out. We're promising all these things and wondering why we're upside down.
Hello and welcome to another episode. We are so excited today for our guests, but before we get there, we've got to answer the question in the Ask Ken segment. We're grateful for the individual who sent in this question, which is, why do DSOs still run out of cash even when revenue is going up? Now, let me touch on this, and I think one of our guests has a lot of energy and passion around this as well. But here's the thing. As soon as revenue starts going up, your cash is automatically going to start going down. It is not going to go up initially. Why? Well, because more revenue means now you have more payroll. Now it means you have more costs. You have supplies. You have all of these different things. So, and it's called the working capital cycle. And the working capital cycle flows based on the actual cash utilization of the business. And so anytime that you're growing, you generally need to be thinking about protecting cash flow until we get out of the working capital cycle that goes, because sometimes it can go negative because you're growing so fast, needing to add team members and expenses and costs and all of those things that obviously drain cash flow. So it's that's why ultimately we say here cash is king. And I know our guests today share similar perspectives on this, but that's hopefully a helpful way to think about if your revenue's going up, get ready to protect cash and make sure that you're not going to run out of cash in that process. All right. So I am very, very excited to introduce our two guests today. We have Anushka and Abhishek, and these two individuals are just people that Dallin and I look up to in the industry. They're doing great things in the industry, and we're super excited. So we'll turn it over to the two of you to go ahead and introduce yourselves, and then we'll jump into your dental truth or dental truths that you'd like to talk about on the episode today.
Thank you so much for having us. We were super excited when Dallin reached out. We were like, oh my gosh, we get to be on this podcast because I know you put out so many great things. And Ken, you've been in the industry for so long and you are kind of a force. Everybody knows about the great things you've done and the book. And it's truly our honor to be here.
Yeah, I'll add to that too. And it is an honor to be on your guys' show. And Dallin, as I told you earlier, you're doing great things. And Ken, I told you earlier that I read your book end to end a few years ago. And it was one of those, I think it was early in the industry. No one was really talking about accrual accounting before you kind of really made it the standard, right? I know GAAP accounting is very standard in a lot of other businesses. So for some reason, dentistry has been a little bit behind. From that to just, I know you spent some time at Nuvia and as their president and just ramping an implant, business. So there's a lot that we've learned along the way. I think what you said about revenue just resonated so much with us. And I know Anushka has a lot to add to this as well. One of the little nuggets we picked up along the way as business owners, one of these sayings that revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, but cash is king and queen. It's so true because you could be, we've seen months where we've had like great revenue, but our cash flow was really low. And we're like, where did all the money go? Because we were burning a lot more. Our burn rate was higher on those months. So completely resonated with me. Anushka, what do you want to add to that?
I think you said introduce ourselves. I agree with all of those points, but we're just, two dentists who opened our first practice kind of end of 2015. We acquired a practice that was not doing well, and the owner probably should have sold a few years before. I think he was doing about $200K when we took it over. Interestingly enough, a lot of the practices we picked up have been kind of in that range. So we kind of took over, the two of us practiced there together, and we kind of never looked back. We enjoyed it and just acquired a practice every year or so. And kind of going back to your point about revenue, we were very intentional about slowly adding practices so that way we could make sure that we had profitability and cash flow while we set up our structure and systems.
That's amazing.
So I think now we want to let y'all share like the big main truth for today's episode. What are you passionate about that you think the rest of the industry isn't paying attention to, needs to hear?
Great question. I think
Yeah.
we have two, and we'll just kind of gloss over the first one because we did talk a little bit about it. But I've met a lot of group owners and honestly individual practice owners that they'll kind of say my group is doing X number in revenue, and then slowly we found out we're always impressed. We're like, oh my goodness, you got to so much revenue, and then we find out that they are 1 month away from not being able to make payroll, and that would stress me out. I would not be able to sleep at night. So I think, Ken, as you had said earlier, it's great to talk about number of locations and revenue, but at the end of the day, the entire point, being in business school, we've learned that it's about creating profit for shareholders and stakeholders. And I think that's the important piece. A business is not a business until, in my opinion, you can do that.
Exactly. I mean, business school also teaches you, right? Assets equals liabilities plus shareholders' equity. But if there's no shareholders' equity at the end of the day, there is no profit to give out or no dividends to distribute, right? So I think we're always cognizant. I think that's our big truth. We're always thinking about that at the forefront, because without cash flow, you can't hire great talent. You cannot pay people really well. You can't be competitive, right? You can't pay people competitive wages. You can't introduce benefits. You can't let people advance in your business, right? I think those are all really important things. And without cash, you can't do any of that. There's a reason Berkshire Hathaway is sitting on $350 billion of cash, right? Because Warren Buffett recognized a really long time ago that without cash, there's no strength. And my dad always said growing up, cash is king, money is strength, right? And it's so true even to this day.
Yeah. And I think that ties in. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that ties in kind of, with our other truth, which was that on that track, when we hear about these groups that are, we have associates come in, new grads all the time. Well, you're going to give me a $30K sign-on bonus, right? And I want $1,500 a day minimum. Meanwhile, their production, they've only ever done 1 crown a day. And I'm sitting here saying, so if you get $1,500 a day, what are you going to promise me you can produce? And inevitably, they don't know because they've never been in the real world. So that's probably part of the reason that a lot of these, groups might be struggling is we're promising these new grads who don't have the skills to be able to educate patients, to be able to get treatment acceptance, and to be able to actually do the treatment and not refer almost everything out. We're promising all these things and wondering why we're upside down.
Exactly. And in fact, I actually just wrote about this on my LinkedIn post today, because this is something it's actually a point of contention. It's frustrating, right? We recently interviewed a new grad who said, I'm just going to kind of read that out. He said, what benefits are included? Is there a sign-on bonus? Can I compare this offer because I have multiple different offers? Will you carry this material or supply that my school used one time? I don't really do root canals. I've done anteriors, but I don't really believe that I should be the one doing bicuspids and molars. I'm not sure where that belief came from. I don't really do surgical extractions, so that's for the oral surgeon to do. My goal is to make 250 to 300K. None of these questions are crazy, and I get it. They're allowed to ask these questions, but the important questions that never came up were questions like, how do I actually get really good at dentistry? How do I pick up my speed and efficiency? How do I become dangerously good clinically? How do I crush it at great bedside manner? And what courses do I really take to improve my communication skills? Right at the end of the day, those are questions that we should be asking as new dentists, because that's how you go make the money that you want to make and produce the money you want to produce, because that also means you're creating a ton of impact. I recently asked one of my doctors, actually, Anushka, you were that we both asked this doctor, what do you think drives impact? Like, who would you go to? The dentist that produces like 6,000 a day or the dentist that produces 2K a day? She said the dentist that produces 6K a day, but she's the dentist that produces 2K a day. So we said, so what you're saying is you would not go to a dentist like you. And she said, I'm not saying that. I said, why do you think you should go to a dentist that produces 6K a day? Because that dentist probably has more experience and more reps under their belt. I'm like, exactly. Right? So that means you got to get reps under your belt before you start to expect to make all this money. And that's kind of how the real world works.
I think this is such a fascinating topic. I've got 2 comments. The first is, I love the core values that y'all are exhibiting. It seems like at Aero Dental, you care a lot about hard work, about grit, about putting in the effort to really deliver results. And that's something that really resonates with both Ken and I. I think the first question that comes to my head is, how often do you see this? And where do you think this mentality comes from? Because the first thing that comes to my head is, I've heard often from groups about how competitive getting into dental schools is becoming, because you've got massive players like Heartland and Aspen that need these enormous pipelines of new dentists coming in. And so I imagine for a D4 dental student, like, you'd have DSOs knocking on your door every day, trying to one up each other with the perks that they're offering, trying to attract you into their group. And I imagine it could create a sense of entitlement. So they think like, wow, I'm a D4 dental student. Everyone wants me. Like in thinking about economics and of supply and demand, like, they're demanding, I'm the supply. Like, I've got the leverage to negotiate some perks for myself that maybe dentists in the past haven't. So we're really curious your thoughts on that, and just where you think the mentality is coming from.
Yeah, this is kind of a sore point for us because you're absolutely right. There's this kind of like doctor ego, and it's kind of funny because the two of us are doctors, but I don't ever remember as an associate saying, I want this bonus, I want minimums, I think I just, for the most part, just went to work and did my job. And again, not to say that that's also the only way to do it. I think it's fair to ask questions. But there's this ego coming from exactly what you said. All these people want me, so I must be amazing. I must be the best. But actually, you're not. Let's be real about it. There are very, very, very few new grads that come out that I can be like, yes, I would trust you. The vast majority, they need a few years to get to the point where they can actually do what they need to do in order to keep a practice going and keep it successful, and to have patients actually want to come back to them. So I think, that's a big issue. And then obviously, the cost of dental school, I know everyone talks about that. That's very stressful on a new grad. So for them, they're thinking, well, I have $500K in student loans, so I must come out and make at least $300K, except it's you eat what you kill in this situation. And, there's no such thing as a free lunch. If a group is going to give you something upfront and you don't perform, they are going to get it back somehow. And that's the part that nobody talks about.
Exactly. And also just to add to that too, it is not the fault of the student that's graduating, right? I think that the flaw is in the system, which is, I would blame the dental school more, because to your point, the supply demand, I think you nailed it. I think the dentists think they have all the leverage because there's like this supply and clearly there's a demand and I'm the supply. But the problem is it's not the right kind of supply, right? That there's an elasticity to that supply, and that supply is going to catch up to that demand pretty quick at some point. So if you want to be the right kind of supply, which create a certain kind of inelasticity, so to speak, you got to get really good at what you do, right? That's why by definition, Anushka, you always say this, every dentist thinks they're the best, but best means there can only be one, right? So it means dentists have to put in the work, put in the reps to actually get better. And that actually takes time. And I feel like impatience is not a virtue, and most of the new grads that are coming out, in our experiences, are very impatient to get to that 300, 400, 500K of compensation without actually putting in the reps, and that's the frustration.
Yeah,
No, that makes a lot of sense. Sorry, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I love this conversation. I love this dialogue. I just keep coming back in my mind as you're talking that the hardest part about dentistry is people. And there are a lot of people that it takes in order to run a dental practice, right? Or to run a dental group. And the alignment, and I've got a question for you guys on this, but the alignment that you need with all of those different people that are functioning in this ecosystem, at some point, driving the alignment ultimately becomes the job of the culture and how you're organized as a culture, what you believe in, what you care about, what you don't care about, and how you want everyone to communicate with patients versus not, and so on and so forth. I would love to hear how you guys, because I know that you've done this, how have you built a culture that ultimately drives the outcome for those associates as they show up and they start figuring out, this is how it works here, and I need to do things this way, and I just got in trouble because I forgot to do this or I forgot to do that. I'd love to hear how you've built a culture around, because that's the only way you can drive human beings, right? Culture is how you motivate and drive the human element of it, and that's the chaos, right? Every morning everybody shows up and they got their set of messes and whatever. Love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. So I think the first piece is having core values. I know, I used to think core values, there's this little thing, like a little poster on the wall, whatever it means. It's like this fluffy stuff. But I've come to realize over time that they're actually super, super important. And, we tell our team members, if you have team members that don't fit the core values, you are going to be miserable coming into work every day, because the A players are going to leave because they have C players around them. So we're very conscious about that. And that includes doctors, by the way. We have a doctor who refuses to show up on time for huddle when the rest of the team is there. And that doesn't work for us. Even as a doctor, you have to be there with the rest of the team. And in fact, I would argue even more so, because they look to you as a leader, even though you just graduated. The second piece, I think, is core focus, right? We have a core focus that we are very aligned on, and that is our why. That's our purpose. So I think those are the main things. The third thing I think probably is having our standards. We had somebody once who said something along the lines of, well, the team doesn't respond to me, so I'm just going to stop responding to them when they need me to respond. And I said that absolutely not. You don't lower the standards to meet them. You stay here and have everybody else come up to your standard. So I think I guess the word is we're very aligned on those kind of things.
Yeah, those are really good points. One more thing I will add to that is just measuring. I think what gets measured gets managed, right? We all know that. We're pretty big on accountability, right? And KPIs. And then unfortunately, sometimes dentists don't like that. We've been told before by new dentists that came out that we don't like looking at, metrics or being compared to other dentists. And we're pretty clear in our standards that, if it's never the top dentist that's saying that, right? It's usually the dentists at the bottom that are making those types of complaints, right? So I think we stick to our standards and just let those types of dentists weed themselves out. And sometimes they'll just say, and then it's rare that a dentist will accept that it's on them. They have to take ownership. Sometimes they do, and we can work on them. And when they don't, they'll just blame the supplies or blame something else. And we just know that this is not the right fit because they're not fitting the core values anymore. And so it's amazing how KPIs can actually weed people out just as much as upskill or level up certain people.
Yeah, and sorry.
Go ahead.
To kind of add to that, right? I think the KPIs are important because they don't know otherwise where they stand. They don't know how to improve. We had a dentist who, actually you, Abhishek, had a conversation with her because she was unhappy with her compensation. And we actually pay very well. We pay a pretty high percentage. But he asked her, so what is it that you want to take home as income? And she said something like $300K. So Abhishek asked her, okay, so what is it going to take? What do you have to produce in order to make $300K? And she had no idea. I think she said something like 450.
She said 600. I'll give her that.
But we have percentages. If you look at the math, that math doesn't work. Speaking of math.
So I said, okay, it actually means you would have to, produce close to $900K to $1 million. She said, I don't think I can do that. So then, of course, I said, then you can't make 300K. You'll make 200. Right? That's just math. We didn't make this stuff up. So it's funny.
Yeah, I love this conversation. And it's reminding me of one of my favorite quotes or sayings from Ben Hardy, which is that growth is not about what you say yes to. It's about what you say no to. And when you really clearly establish your core values, your core focus, your standards, you know who you are as an organization, it puts you into the mentality of abundance, gets you out of scarcity, because you can say when a doctor isn't meeting the standard, it gives you the ability to say no. And growth is fueled by saying no to the things that you don't have time for. No to the things that don't fit your core values, your core focus, your standard. And initially, that's really scary. If you're in the scarcity mentality, then you say, oh, it took so much work to hire this doctor, and I don't know if we're going to find a doctor that's as good as them or that can produce as much as them, and it's going to require so much effort to replace them. So let's just keep them around. And when you are willing to like hold your floor, hold your standard and say, no, if you can't meet this, then there's the door and we'll find someone else. Like that is what is ultimately going to drive the growth of the organization and will allow you to build an empire.
You hit the nail on the head. You know how many there's a few times we've raised the floor in our business career, and every time we've done it, it pisses a bunch of people off. That's the truth, right? Because when you raise the floor, what they're saying is, I don't want this change, but you're making me change, right? I'm happy where I am. But we're saying, actually, the business needs to go here. It's going in a different direction and we need to come along, but you need to like raise your standards to meet ours. And it definitely pisses a bunch of people off. And what happens sometimes, Anushka, we've both seen this, sometimes those people, when they're underperforming, it's easier for them to just blame the culture of the company. And I see this, right? There are some really good DSOs out there, but of course, they'll have unhappy employees, unhappy dentists blaming the culture of the company. It's going to happen, right? Because they're expecting a certain standard.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So many great points there. Is there, as we start to think about wrapping up the episode, are there any final thoughts that you have to kind of wrap up this concept of, new associates and, building an organization that is, associate driven, but also patient care driven?
Yeah, I think, for me, it's about, to the DSOs or even the individual practices out there, really it's about, again, holding those standards and having the associates rise to meet those standards. I think the industry needs an entire rehaul personally, because there's been a lot of, again, the doctor ego, banging my chest. I'm the doctor, but the reality is when you have no work experience, you may be a doctor, you have the skills of a dentist, but that doesn't mean that you yet understand how real life works.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. And also, often I think to your point, Anushka, when dentists do come in, it's hard. I think personally, I'll speak for ourselves. We're just putting dentists through more rounds of interviews at this point because I think it's just easier to get it right when you're hiring, as opposed to we've been there ourselves where we had to get a dentist because an office was dark and we had to plug somebody in so patients wouldn't leave. And I think that's the stuff that needs a complete rehaul in the industry, is how we hire dentists, what kind of personality tests we do on them. We never used to do that, and we're starting to do that on some of our dentists as well. It's just easier to put them through multiple sets of interviews and weed them out at the beginning, because it is impossible to change them once you let them through the door. And now people are going to blame the culture if that's the wrong fit.
So this move that you've made, are you pleased with the results you're getting as a result of that?
It's early days for us since we've kind of made that move. I think, yes, with the most recent hire we just made, which was last week, we had this dentist meet us at least 5 times before we made that hire. Screening call, virtual call, met the practice, took him out to a coffee shop, asked more questions, went over contract before we even presented the contract. So that was 5 meetings where we had, and that was an educated dentist, but we knew that this dentist really wanted to be a part of the group by the time we signed him. Yeah.
And most people will push back on doing this because it takes so much of your time. But at the end of the day, and how much time is it going to take you to unwind that bad associate and all the problems that they create in your organization, right? All right, Dallin, you have a final thought here?
Nope. I was just going to say thanks to both of you for coming on. This has been a fantastic conversation. It's going to be a great episode. So we feel honored that you took the time to sit down with us. Thank you both.
Thank you so much. We're really, again, very happy to be here.
Yes, the pleasure is ours. Thank you so much for having us.